Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to my fantasy matchup series. And this is going to be a sort of a one versus two type of matchup. Just because, I was going to do two separate videos for this one, but I thought I'd just put it into, one whole video just because, in my opinion, I don't know, I think it's easier and quicker to do it this way rather than just have it as, two separate videos because it's like even though they're two different fights, they still revolve around the same sort of conversation, right? Considering you have two champions that are in the same weight class, and then you have obviously the former champion who is considered to be a legend to many people. So that's why I just thought I'd put both fights in one video. And those fights are Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. So, yeah, I thought I'd talk about this because, there's been a conversation around boxing fans, there's been a conversation with boxing fans surrounding these two fights, you know what I mean? And, um, yeah, I thought I'd give my thoughts on these two fights because, I do think they are interesting for sure. So, we'll start off with the Spence one because I think I see a more clear winner in the Spence versus Pacquiao fight, prime wise anyway, than I do Crawford versus Pacquiao, and I'll explain why later. But yeah, in terms of the Spence fight, so I do think that Pacquiao would have beaten Spence, in my opinion. And the reason, well, we'll talk about both their styles first. So Errol Spence Jr.'s style, in my opinion, he's a bit of a headhunter, right? In that he relies on his like size and being a brute to try and bully his opponents, and try to get the knockout that way. He's a very hard puncher. He's a quick puncher for sure, and that's that about Spence. I mean, he's obviously a very good fighter, Errol Spence Jr., and he's good at pressuring his opponents and all that. Right? He can counterpunch for sure, and he can outbox his opponents for sure. Like he outboxed Mikey Garcia and Danny Garcia as well, right? And he was even countering, who was it? Oh yeah, Sean Porter at times. But I think his style, when you look at his fights, he's more of just, come forward and just, land those big shots to the body. He's obviously known for being a big body puncher, and yeah, that's sort of Spence's style, in my opinion. I do think Spence is a bit of a, and even though he goes to the body on his opponents, I do think he can hit kind of low. Like, I do think he fouls a lot in his fights, and I do think he's a very dirty fighter, right? Like the Ugas fight, I thought he was, the amount of low blows he was landing in that fight was ridiculous, in my opinion. I thought he was clearly, hitting below the belt or on the belt line of Dennis Ugas, and he's done it in a couple of fights, like the Sean Porter fight, for example. But either way, I mean, he's still like, I don't know, he's still. It's not like, I don't know, some other fighter who, isn't a good fighter. Like, I don't know, say, well, I don't know, I don't want to say Jeff Horn isn't a good fighter, but I mean, Jeff Horn, I'd say, is like less skilled than Spence, but he was someone who relied on dirty fighting to get wins and stuff. And, same with other fighters, right? But Spence isn't just a dirty fighter. He's also, you take that aside, he is a good fighter, right? So, that being said, in a fight with Manny Pacquiao, I think I think he would win like the early rounds, like from rounds 1 to 4, rounds 1 to 3, something like that, right? And I do see Spence giving Manny problems by landing those shots to the body for sure. But I think Manny definitely would have come back in the later rounds and start to like land his short range punches, like his like that right hook of his, and his he would have been able to land his jab as well, his left cross, right? And um I think I don't know if he would have knocked Spence out, but I do think he would have beaten Spence up in this fight. I think he would have weathered the storm early on, and been able to come back and pretty much dominate the fight from there. So That's just my opinion. I think Pacquiao was way too quick for Spence, right? I'm not saying Spence is a slow fighter, but he's not the quickest in history, right? Like, I think Spence definitely would have given him problems for sure, but I don't know, just based on the records. I mean, I know Spence is still young, right? And I'm not saying Spence is a bad fighter. He's certainly shown that he's a proven champion in his division. But I mean, when you look at Pacquiao, I mean, in my opinion, Pacquiao's, he's faced bigger guys than Spence, right? I mean, that's the issue that people have, right? Is that, oh, but Spence is big. He's too big. Well, I mean, Pacquiao, I mean, he's faced bigger guys. Oscar De La Hoya was bigger, but he was like 5'11". He was taller. Same thing with other fighters, right? And that's that. I mean, he's fought guys who are like almost 6 feet tall, or probably are 6 feet tall, right? And sure, I'd say Spence, he's more talented than than those guys that I mentioned that Pacquiao fought. But look, at the same time, I think Pacquiao's fought guys who are quicker than Spence and who are just like more talented and stuff, right? Like I think even like Mayweather, for example. I mean, look, in my opinion, I thought Manny won against Mayweather, right? I don't think it was a robbery necessarily, but I do think that Manny was definitely being the aggressor in that fight, and I did think he landed more punches in that fight, while Mayweather was looking just to, run around the ring, just like counterpunch here and there, and in my opinion, I thought that was a clear Manny win, but like I said, I don't think it was a robbery, right? It wasn't like I scored at 116 to 112. But, even then, I think Mayweather was a better fighter than Errol Spence Jr., just my opinion. So, yeah. So, that being said, I think Manny would have won a clear decision. Well, I think he could win a stoppage, to be honest, but I think it would have been like in the later rounds, like from rounds 10 to 12 or something like that. And, yeah, I think Manny definitely would have won a stoppage or a decision, and if not, he probably would just be robbed on the scorecards. So, yeah, I think Prime Manny would have been too much stylistically for someone like Spence. I see Spence giving Manny a tough fight early on, but I think Manny's chin would be able to hold up to that, and I think later on he would have like felt Spence out and been able to, sort of time Spence and just use his speed to his advantage to really land a lot of volume punches on Spence. Plus, the thing about Manny is, like, in my opinion, he's faced guys who've had better chins than Spence. Like Miguel Cotto, I thought had a better chin than Spence, and Manny was able to knock him down like twice or something, and was the first guy, and I think the only guy to have stopped Miguel Cotto. So, that's pretty impressive on Pacquiao's part. And I know Spence is like bigger than Cotto and is probably a bit more like is a bit more talented, but still, like I said, like if Manny was able to stop Cotto, I think he could have done the same thing to Spence. So I'm going with Manny on that fight, and that's that. So let's talk about the Terrence Crawford fight. Okay, this one's a bit trickier in my opinion to really judge or predict. The reason I think that is because Terrence Crawford we've seen as a good counterpuncher, right? That's sort of his style. He's a very complete boxer, right? Like he's what I call a boxer dash puncher, right? Or I guess what many people, I mean that's like a style, right, in boxing. And meaning that he can fight pretty much any style or can utilize or take inspiration from different styles in boxing, right? So for example, he can he has the power of a slugger. He can, outbox his opponents if he needs to, and he can swarm his opponents with combinations as well, right? So Terrence Crawford, I think, is a very complete boxer, but I think what makes him dangerous is his counterpunching skills. So I think that would stylistically be a tough matchup for Manny because Manny Pacquiao's weakness tends to be that he can, how do I say, like he can get a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like, like when he goes in, he can be kind of reckless. Reckless, that's the word I'm looking for, right? He can be kind of reckless as he's going in with his flicker jab, was like 1-2 or like double jab 1-1-2, all that stuff. And meaning that he doesn't necessarily defend himself as much as he maybe could, right? He does that at times, and I think Manny struggled with counter punchers in the past. Like, for example, you know what I mean? He was able to, like, he struggled with Mayweather at times, right? Even though I thought he won that fight, I will admit that he did struggle with Mayweather in some of those rounds, right? And, you know, it's happened in a bunch of fights. In that fight where, you know, he got knocked out, and it was also due to a counterpunch, right? So I think Crawford, and the thing about Crawford, you know, like, I think Crawford's power, in my opinion, is very underrated, right? Or it was before, like, the Porter fight anyway. I don't think it is now, but, you know, I think people now realize that, you know, Crawford does punch hard, but obviously, you know, maybe Crawford doesn't punch as hard as Spence, but I do think he has power, and I think that could cause problems for Manny Pacquiao. However, just like just like Errol Spence Jr., Crawford also does have some weaknesses, although they're not that big of weaknesses. Like, oh, you can expose them or whatever, right? I think his weakness is that his defense can be lackluster at times. Don't get me wrong, it can be like superb at times. I'm not like denying his defense or saying that it's trash, right? But I'm just saying, like, he can sometimes be sort of inconsistent with it, if that makes sense, right? And, you know, in terms of who has the better chin, I think, like, Manny, in my opinion, has the better chin than Crawford. I don't think Crawford has a glass chin or a weak chin, but, you know, he's been rocked in the past, right? He's been, there was also one fight I thought he got knocked down in. I forgot who the fighter's name was, but, you know, it was ruled a slip for some reason, and that was that. So yeah. Also, I guess it's not a weakness of Crawford, but I think it's just that he hasn't really fought any high-level opposition other than Sean Porter, you know what I mean? And, you know, and that's kind of that, right? So, yeah, I think, I don't know. This is a tough one because I can see Manny, like, you know, really being stylistically a bad matchup for Crawford, right? And, like, getting through to his defense and, you know, like, landing on his chin. But I can also see Crawford, like, countering Manny with, like, all these, like, combinations, uppercuts, and all that stuff. So this is a very, you know, and I remember I had one, I made a poll about this, and about who you guys think would win, and I think someone in the comments said that it was a very 50-50 fight, and I, you know, couldn't agree more. I think this is a very 50-50 fight. But if I had to pick a winner, I think Manny would have won. I think he would have won a very... Although I could see Manny stopping Crawford. I think it would have gone the distance. I think it would have been a very competitive fight. You know what I mean? Just like the Mayweather one was, right? But I don't know. I just think... I think the reason I picked Manny is because I think Manny has the better chin than Crawford, and I also think that, you know, Manny... I don't think he would have been knocked out by any of Crawford's counters unless, like, Crawford land flushed on the chin, like that one fight, you know, where he got knocked out and, you know, something like that. But I don't know. Even then, I think Manny, you know, that was sort of just like a pitch perfect punch, and I don't know if that would have happened in the Crawford fight. So I'll go with Manny. I think he would have been able to stop Crawford. However, I don't know how likely that is. But I do think he could have won, like, a close decision as well. So I don't know. That's a tough one. So yeah, I'm not saying that Crawford beats Spence. I'm just saying styles make fights, and I think Crawford is stylistically a worse matchup for Manny than Manny is for Spence. So yeah, those are just my takes on the fight. Those two fights. You know what I mean? I think you know, they're very good fights. I think Crawford versus Manny would have been a very, very interesting fight for sure. Prime versus prime wise anyway. I think Spence is a bit more like, I don't know, like, that one's a bit easier to judge in my opinion, and that's that. But yeah, anyway, this video is going on for too long. Let me know what you guys think though. Let me know who you think would have won between these guys, and yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Hope you guys have a good day or night wherever you are, and yeah, take care and peace.